This podcast is brought to you by House to Grow in conjunction with Anthony Selby, a financial advisor. House to Grow is a not-for-profit organisation which empowers communities through education for life, holistic health and well-being. We hope this series is helpful and impactful.
Hi everybody, welcome to today's episode of House to Grow. Today's episode is designed for people of all ages and knowledge levels wanting to get a better handle on their financial life. The topic is financial health check. We'll demystify some of the language around money and learn the key elements of putting together your financial life plans. How your habits and attitudes around money can support or sabotage you, and what else you can do. Attendees will look to explore their current financial health questionnaire that illustrates areas they need to improve or focus on to have better financial well-being. On today's episode, we're very lucky to have Gail McHugh, a financial advisor, very experienced and knowledgeable. Gail, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Gail, let's start with, defining and understanding what we mean by financial health check. What does that mean?
Firstly, to me, it's a case of looking at you in a holistic sense. You need to consider what your income is, what your expenditure is. So how much is coming in and how much is going out? Because nothing ever works when more's going out than what's coming in. It's just unrealistic for that to work on a regular basis.
Yep.
Then we have to look at whether you have debt. So income, what's in, what's out, debt, whether you have a need for life insurance. And I think that's a really important thing because Australians are generally very much underinsured.
Yes.
They don't think about insurance as a way to manage risk. They look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's expensive. I can't afford it. They don't think about the consequences if they aren't going to be here, or worse yet, they're here and disabled and can't earn their income.
That's right. I often ask, do you insure your car? And they say yes. And I say, well, what about your future income and your greatest asset, which is your ability to work? If something happens to you, do you think that's important as your car?
Oh, 100%, because without your income, nothing works. Then I ask them, have you got any estate plans? And now that's a technical term used by we people in the industry and legal people. But what that simply means is, have you got a will in place? And I'm not talking about a post office will or a will kit. I'm talking about, have you gone and got proper legal advice to get your situation legally ironed out the best way you would like it to be?
Yes.
And that also should include, as part of your estate planning package, having an enduring power of attorney. Now, I'm giving away my age here, I'm 60. So for the last 28 years, I have had an enduring power of attorney. I got one when I was 32, and I'm up to iteration, so version number 4.
Yes.
Because when I got the first one, my kids weren't old enough to be able to, they weren't adults.
Yep.
Now they're all in their 30s, so literally they are my powers of attorney now that I'm separated from my husband.
Yes.
And does your power of attorney, because it does in Queensland, cover your health? But not all states allows that to happen, because most people don't realise that without a power of attorney and a health guardianship or a health directive, legally written down in legal form, signed, authorised, witnessed, all those things, you actually will have the doctors and the government telling you what can happen with your money and what can happen with your health.
Yeah. And they'll charge you for the pleasure as well. Yeah, so they usually charge you for the pleasure of doing that too. So I don't know if anybody's ever come across there's different names in different states. In New South Wales, where I am, it's called the New South Wales Trustee and Guardian. And there are different, it used to be the Office of the Protective Commissioner. Each state has its own version of that. And a lot of people don't realize that they can step in and manage your money and charge you for it and do they might not even have oversight if you haven't put appropriate arrangements in place. And that can be a really difficult challenge for people dealing with bureaucracy, when they have to just want to access their own money, or you can Google them online to see some of the problems that come up.
Oh, I've got a number of horror stories that I've found over the years where I've been introduced to a family after the Protective Office, as it was in New South Wales, had taken over, or
Yes.
the public guardian. And literally, it got to a point where a lady was trying to sell her parents' house to pay for their aged care. But because neither of them had put a power of attorney in place, she could not sell a house, even though she was their only beneficiary.
Yeah.
So literally, that government department destroyed her future inheritance because the fees associated with her parents' care outweighed the value of the house.
Yeah. That's a really good example.
Get your piece of paper right.
Yeah. So just to repeat that, a basic estate plan, will,
Yep.
not a post office will or a will kit, a proper will that's done by a qualified solicitor.
Correct.
And a power of attorney, which could be enduring, which means we can have one that continues after we're incapacitated, unable to make a decision. We're in hospital, we're sick, we can't act. We now have an enduring power of attorney that enables other people to act for us that we choose.
Yes.
And then we can also have a limited power of attorney or something like that, which might be we're just out of the country, or it puts restrictions. It doesn't allow that person to act after I'm already sick.
But hang on, there's a trick on those ones.
Mm.
If you lose your mental capacity, so to use a common term of phrase,
Yep.
if you lose your marbles,
Yep.
those ones actually stop working.
Yes, correct. That's exactly it.
So you need to have the enduring one.
Correct.
To protect you into your later years.
Very well. Exactly. That was where I was going with that. So make sure your power of attorney is enduring if it needs to be, not just a limited or a restricted power of attorney. And then also an advanced health directive, or a guardian. We call it in New South Wales, a health guardian, which essentially says, if life support is on, or if something needs to be made, a decision needs to be made about my health, and who gets to make that decision, and what is it under different circumstances, so that if you do lose your capacity, and you don't want to be kept as a vegetable on life support for the rest of your life, you've made your wishes clear, for the rest of your life, in inverted commas.
Correct. And I personally have had to actually invoke 2 of those advanced health directives in Queensland.
Yep.
For family members, because the medical profession were going absolutely against the wishes of those 2 individuals.
Yes.
So I've actually had to stand up, and it was really emotionally confronting to have to do that. But it's really important that you are able to respect the dignity and the wishes of the person, rather than have the health professionals go, yes, we're going to do this to them.
Yeah, exactly. And just coming back, before we were talking about estate planning, we were talking about, you mentioned specifically life insurance. Yeah, we'll broadly call those personal insurances. So as opposed to general insurances, where we can insure our car or our health insurance, or travel insurance, or home and contents, we're talking about our personal insurances. I think one thing that's really important to understand for people is there's a triangle of 3 things that people can set up. They might think, I don't need estate plans. I don't need to draw up a will. I don't have any assets, right? I've only got a little bit of debt, some cash in the bank, whatever. I don't have. Now, one of the golden triangle, I'm going to throw this at you to explain, but the golden triangle for people who are younger, who have maybe family or income to protect if something happens to them, and who also want to make sure that their risks are protected, and those insurances that they've put in place go to the right people in the right way without being taxed too much. And also, last one, not having, you mentioned, we talked about insurances being expensive potentially, some ways to maybe mitigate some of those costs or reduce some of the impact of that by using that triangle. Can I get you to explain maybe some potential basic strategies or basic things that a financial advisor would do in a health check for, say, a young couple with not many assets yet, but a lot of time ahead of them?
Okay, so most people don't understand that life insurance is based on the risk as the insurer sees it at the time.
Yep.
So if you're young and healthy and what we in the industry would call a clean skin, you've got no health issues that
Yep.
are chronic,
Yes.
then that's the ideal time to be considering getting life insurances or personal insurances. The reason for that is while you have low risk, there's actually almost a reward, for want of a better term, because as you get more risks associated, sometimes the insurer will actually say, I'm sorry, we're going to put an extra fee on this if we're going to extend cover to you.
Yes.
Then there's other times when they go, oh no, we don't want to know about you because you're too sick for us to take on board.
Or they just charge you, they charge you a really high fee to cover you, which usually are called loadings. So they add loadings on as extra fees because you're risky. You know, you might enjoy bungee jumping, riding a motorbike, and smoking cigars, or have some other pre-existing health condition that makes them cautious.
And all that means is it increases your likelihood or your chance of having to make a claim, which means they'll have to pay you.
Yes.
Now, I know people will see things like ads for Real Insurance and other online insurers for personal insurance. They tend to come with hidden traps, and most people just go, oh, but it's cheap.
Yes.
But those ones are cheap for a reason. And that is frequently because they actually don't pay out at time of claim.
Yes.
So when you go and work with an insurer and a financial planner to put your insurances in place, we actually take the time to underwrite. That's the term that the insurer uses.
Yes.
Which is basically saying, we've looked at your situation, we understand your health right now, and we, the insurer, are prepared to take on this level of risk. And they do that knowingly. They use an actuary, which is somebody who does all the magic sums behind, to figure out what your likelihood of making a claim is going to be. And they will offer you a level of cover at a certain price based on your circumstance. And that's then, if you've met their boxes and ticked all their boxes, you need to make a claim, they will pay out. The other ones where it's just like, I've rung up on the phone, spent 10 minutes, and I've now got X number of dollars worth of life insurance, that actually doesn't always pay out because simply they go back and they underwrite at time of implementation, at time of claim.
Yeah.
So it could be 20 years later, and you might have paid that premium, but you may not actually be eligible for a payout because you didn't tell them about something. That they should have technically known.
Yep. So it's, I think, just to sum up what I'm hearing, the first point, it's really important to understand that insurance, just because it's called insurance, they're not the same thing. There's a lot of different types, and there's various qualities. And just because you think I have insurance, it's like health insurance. You can try and go, something really big and serious might happen to you. You go to hospital and they don't pay anything back. And you might have been paying a premium. That premium's low. And then some insurers, they cover you for everything. So when it comes time, a lot. So when it comes time to get your teeth done or, have a baby or whatever it is that you need, suddenly you realize, oh, great, I'm getting a lot of money back. This isn't nearly as expensive as I thought. Same thing. Yeah. Same thing applies with personal insurances. And can you just break down some different types? So there's life insurance, and then what are the other types of those?
Okay, so there's life insurance, and that's frequently matched together with something called total and permanent disability insurance.
Yeah.
Now, anyone who's got super in Australia in an industry super fund, so an Aussie Australian super, what are they called?
Rest.
Rest, all of those, Hesters.
Host Plus,
Host Plus. They've all usually got a unitized insurance of life and TPD. And the unit inside of those super funds is set at a set number of dollars, and the unit coverage is determined by your age.
Yep.
So it's basically something that while you're younger, you'll be able to buy more insurance per dollar spent in each unit. But as you get older, people may have 3 units of cover, and that unit of cover may be worth $5,000 each. So it might be $15,000 worth of cover when you're in your 60s, that when you were in your 20s would have given you closer to $210,000 worth of cover.
Yep.
So those types of things that are hidden inside of your super, most people don't understand. And that's a very important factor, because people will always say, oh, I've got insurance in my super, but not know what they've actually got. And unless you know what you're looking for, you're not going to know.
That's it. So when it comes time to claim, or when it comes time to actually need it, you might find that there's a surprise there waiting for you.
And it's not a good surprise.
Not a good surprise.
A nasty surprise. So there's that. And also, we're talking about total and permanent disability. So there's different rules inside of superannuation that are very restricted in comparison to what you can get if you are insuring it and paying the premiums yourself.
Yep.
So I always encourage people to have, if they can't afford to pay for it all outside of superannuation, we put some inside of superannuation, and then we put those two premiums together. The super premium pays some, they pay some, and they get a better quality cover overall versus just going, well, I can't afford it, so I'm not having it.
Yep.
So sometimes the trade-off is I need the insurance, and I'll have my super pay part of it in the short term. I've got clients right now that we're doing a strategy for, and we know that they're going to inherit probably $1.5 million in the next, because the parents passed already. It's not future planning. It's close to happening in the next 6 months. So we're only going to hold their insurances until that money comes in, because the cost of insurance for them is around $12,000 a year per person.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. Yep.
So, it's a case of getting the right trade-off and knowing that money's coming in. They are very concerned about what the cost of those covers are doing to their cash flow and their superannuation balances. So, and then there's another one which I love as well, and that's critical illness cover. And
just before we go on to critical illness, I just want to continue a little bit more with total and permanent disability. So we refer to that as TPD, total and permanent disability. By definition, and I want to be careful here, but by definition, you would think it means your total
definition, right?
Where you have to be totally and permanently disabled. But in practice, the definition is a little bit, it can be misleading, and there are two main types of cover that may be applicable. One, can we go into that a little bit, just so we know, because there are two types, and I think that's a really important point for people to understand about these, nuances and these differences, and why they might think that they have something that they don't.
Right. Okay. So we talked before about most people having stuff in their super fund. So let's consider that first. Under the law, there are limitations as to the amount and the style of insurances that most super funds are allowed to offer. So when we're talking total and permanent disability cover inside of super, it generally gets down to activities of daily living as one thing. But then again, that can mean you can't feed yourself. You can't shower yourself. You can't dress yourself. It's a very over-the-top definition. When you compare it to, let's say, I know of cases in the past where people who were paying for their own insurances for total and permanent disability, and they were a teacher. They lost their sight, as in they couldn't see the back of the classroom. So anyone who was at the back of the classroom and trying to put their hand up and gain the teacher's attention no longer was seen. So under the terms of that contract of insurance, that teacher was actually paid out a TPD payment simply because they were no longer able to carry out their normal duties.
So that's the two big differences. One is there's a really high threshold or a high limit in terms of when they'll pay out. You have to almost be a vegetable or close to it. You have
Pretty
to,
much, yeah.
yeah, can't see, can't hear, can't move. You're unable to basically, you're alive but barely. And then the other version is you can't actually do the job that you're, usually able to do under normal conditions, and therefore they'll pay out.
And that person was, other than that, loss of vision, it was literally, they were literally healthy. There were no other issues going on. It was a loss of vision. They couldn't see the back of the room, so therefore they lost their driver's license. But they were still able to do all the other things that they could do. They could use the computer still because they could see close.
Yep.
Couldn't see at the back of the room.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing for example, if you're a medical professional or something that you've got a high level of income and probably a high level of debt as well. It's important to understand that if you can no longer do the surgery, you might still be able to work as in the hospital as in administration or in some other capacity, but that's not going to give you the same level of income, and so they might not pay you out because you can work still.
Yeah,
okay.
So very important to have ideally a combination of both.
Good. Okay. And then critical illness. Oh, sorry, was that what you were saying? The other one,
Yeah.
critical illness?
Critical
Yep. Trauma.
Often known as trauma. I think most people should have that. It covers basically a multitude of sins, for want of a better term. Covers things like cancer, heart attacks, all those things that happen unexpectedly.
Yep.
And it's really ideal to have a lump sum of capital become available, so cash effectively. Yep. And sometimes it can be a partial payout, sometimes it's a full payout. I know years ago a client had a biopsy done and she had breast cancer, but they were able to manage it. And so rather than paying out the whole policy, she got a partial payout.
Yep.
Because there were a whole pile of medical bills that came with that. And that's what that type of cover is for.
Great. And then usually the most important one that I say, if you had to pick one, which one would you pick? It's usually, for me anyway, if I had to, and I would never say pick one, but if you have an income to protect, and particularly if you're young, it's what we call income protection insurance. So there's four main types. We've got life and TPD, which often come together. TPD being total and permanent disablement or disability. We have trauma, which is also called critical illness, and that's based on these events that are defined in the cover. Yep. And then we have what's called income protection or salary continuance. There's another name for it.
Now they're very, very different.
Yes, they are. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. So salary continuance generally happens as part of your superannuation offering. It's usually very limited. And when I say limited, it's frequently unitized or capped.
Yep.
Now, I've seen people go, oh, I've got income protection in my super. They had $850 a month worth of salary continuance in their super.
Yep.
After 90 days of waiting, the policy might pay out. But they had to have had contributions going into the account at the time. So they had to be an active member. And it only went for 2 years.
Yep.
So in the old days, I've been around long enough to know the old days, you could put in place an income protection cover for somebody when they were 25 or 20 or whenever, right through to age 65. And if they happen to go on claim, they could potentially have 40 years worth of income replaced. Now you can get policies that are anywhere between 2 years and 5 years, depending upon your insurer and your personal occupation and level of risk that the insurer perceives you to be. That's better than 2 years of partial or not enough, because that person's income was $4,000 a month. So $850 was not even going to pay their mortgage. So they're not the same. You have to really understand the differences, because most Australians are walking around with unrecognised risks.
Yeah.
And that's really important when you're doing a health check.
Yep. So we've now got the I guess some broad brush of a trifecta. And let's imagine we had a young couple. We'll finish on this note in a practical example. We have a young couple. They've moved in together. They're thinking about getting married. They're officially in a de facto, or could be, but they're planning their life together. And so, maybe that someone's just pregnant. That's a great example. Probably the female would be my guess. So we've got a pregnant young couple who are planning their future. And we say, okay, what do we need to do for a financial health check for that couple? That trifecta would essentially look at, obviously, we need to start with the beginning, the basics, which we started with in the beginning. That's cash flow, right? Cash flow. What's going in, what's going out, and making sure that we're saving as regularly. The second thing, and then paying our debt back if we have it. And secondly, we have this trifecta, this triangle, and we say, okay, you need to now consider what would happen if this child is born. You've got debt. You've got responsibilities. We might put in place some basic insurance, personal insurances for life, TPD, critical illness, and income protection, one or all.
Yep.
We might look at structuring some of that in superannuation so that the premiums or the amounts that are being paid to keep that insurance are going into superannuation and being paid by the employer through their contribution that they pay each week or each month or quarter, the SGC, the super guarantee contribution, the part that's compulsory.
Yes, that 10.5%. Yep.
10, I think it's 11 now. Yep, always got to keep up. It just keeps going up.
No, 10.5.
It's 10.5, is it? Okay, good. All right, that's your. And then we want to make sure that the estate plan, the wills are done, powers of attorney are done. And what we would typically do is we would look at saying, okay, if so-and-so passed away or was injured or couldn't work, we would now have the ability to look after that child and provide for the, and for the wife and for the husband too, in reverse. That's often a really common case where we have the female in the relationship, if she's staying at home, being underinsured because she's not working. And yet if she wasn't alive or able to fulfill her home duties, there would be a huge, nothing would work. No. So that's usually the case, is that, and we put together that triangle, and we say, let's make sure that couple is protected against these risks in the most, in the cheapest way possible for their situation, but yet ensure that they're going to be paid.
Okay. So one thing we haven't talked about is when you are considering coupling or joining together after previous relationships.
Yes.
If there's assets coming from one side and not from the other, and it's an unbalanced playing field, and even if it's not an unbalanced playing field, it's worthwhile actually having something that's commonly known as a prenup.
Yep.
The vernacular. It's actually can be called a binding financial agreement. So basically, it's taking a snapshot of who you are financially, which is part of the health check, and identifying that if we party up together and we create a relationship, and after 6 months, I understand you're considered to be in a relationship that can cause somebody else to make a claim on your future estate and also on your assets if you split up.
So that's a de facto?
A de facto, yep.
And we've seen cases where there's been a recent famous, sorry to interrupt, a case where a young lady passed away and the insurance in her superannuation went to somebody that the parents and that the girl wouldn't have wanted that to happen, and there was a huge dispute. And they didn't even know there were any assets. That's a good example.
That's a huge thing, because that's another part of this whole thing. But effectively, we have to be very aware that everything we have, everything we do as far as creation of wealth is concerned, whether it be buying a house, creating any forms of savings, whether it be savings in a bank account or shares or in your super, these are all open and up for grabs in the event that something goes wrong with your relationship.
Yes.
And let me tell you, having gone through a binding financial agreement after separation, the ones who make the most money out of this, even we were amicable, we agreed everything, were the solicitors.
Always.
So get it in writing early. rather than later.
Mm.
And I know that this is a tough conversation to be having, but it's a really important conversation to be having, because I have actually encouraged clients in the past to put these in place.
Yep.
My client was the sole beneficiary of her mother's estate. Her mother was still alive at the time, but a new man suddenly jumped into her life. Now, at the time, she had basically her superannuation and a future likely inheritance.
Mm.
She could have put in place a binding financial agreement at the time, which would have limited his claim, for want of a better word, to a portion of her superannuation, because that's all she had.
Yep.
Or said, no, we've come in with nothing, we're going out with nothing, pretty much. You can do that. But now they've been in relationship for coming up to 8 years, and every time she mentioned it, he would go, well, that's it, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
No, you're not going to tell me what I can do, I'm leaving. And guess what? Because of her emotional manipulation, there is no BFA in place. So there's no agreement in place. So now that man has an entitlement to walk away with half of everything. Of course, all he owns is a car.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, that's sadly too common. Gail, thank you so much for today, for your time. I've got one more question for you before we wind up.
Sure.
Where can people keep up to date with you? Where can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I tend to be most active. And I will be starting a podcast later in the year.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be on basically stuff for women around money and life and things like that. It's going to be called Thrive and Shine. So,
Thrive and Shine?
Yeah.
Excellent. Thrive and Shine, the name of your new podcast that's coming up later. I'm really looking forward to.
March. I'm aiming for March.
Excellent. I'll keep my eyes and ears out. I'm really looking forward to that. And
Thank
just
you.
last question, what's the name of your business, your website, if people need to find you for help?
It's www, of course, prosperityplanning.com.au.
Excellent.
And we're on the sunny Gold Coast, but we help people across Australia. I've got clients in all states of Australia except Tasmania.
Yeah, me too. It's great, particularly post-COVID, that it's become the norm to be able to do a lot of these things online rather than having to meet face-to-face all the time.
Somebody said to me, can I have a face-to-face meeting? And I went, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, you're weird. Why do you want one of those?
You don't come to the office?
Yeah, that's funny. Okay. Thank you so much, Gail. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends and family.